So we had a very interesting evening the other day on the PTR. We spent about 6 hours on there. It was a little bit over 6 hours, and we did not finish all 4 of the new dungeons once. This is for a few reasons. We probably could have if we wanted to, but I want to make this video mostly to compare it to the previous week of testing. And right out of the gate, we'll talk about Blizzard's kind of, failure to get the servers up. I only have Tuesday through Friday to do this stuff, and they were supposed to be up Tuesday. It was actually just not even there. Like, literally, the servers were there and the dungeons weren't there. I went on Tuesday hoping at some point because the servers on LiveWow were down all the day because of Plunger Storm or whatever. Couldn't stream at all Tuesday because of this. Then Wednesday they came down for maintenance, I guess, late in the day, and then Thursday they were down like all day or something like that. So literally no servers. They're supposed to be up Tuesday at 1 o'clock, and they're not up until sometime on Thursday. So really disappointing there. But we did get 6 full hours of testing, and I can't really say that I had a lot of success on there. The dungeons are significantly harder than the last time we did the testing. We did the what's the name of the Operation Floodgate the previous week. That was the only dungeon we did. I did like 10 runs of that back to back, pretty much 2 days straight. And that wasn't very fun to do 10 straight dungeons, but I felt like we learned everything we need to learn about that dungeon. And that testing was extremely easy. We did it on like, I think, lower keys. I think we maybe even started on like a 2 or something like that. Triple upgraded to 5, went to 7, 8, 9, and then eventually did it on 10. And the 10 was like pretty hard, but I don't think we upgraded it, but we did finish it a few times, I think. And I felt like the dungeon was very straightforward. So if you didn't watch that video, I'll summarize why. The mechanics in that dungeon are like they don't exist. They're like very, very, very limited. It's like a mechanic, like move away from a circle. That's it. Like that's the only mechanic you do. It's one mechanic at most per trash pack. I think partially something going on in that dungeon too, though, is like how difficult it actually is to combine trash packs. There's like nothing close, it seems. So it's like you're almost set up to do 1 pack at a time, and I think that makes it even easier. But even the bosses, the last boss has like 3 mechanics, and really only 2 of them ever overlap or interact in any way. So it's actually a very, very easy dungeon. But in that video, we talked about why it might still be hard because of tuning, and it wasn't. Now, at that point, I was like, we did 10 hours of testing or 10 dungeons of testing. Well, there was 2 deaths in the dungeons. I was like, whoa, somebody might die in this dungeon, Okay, now flash forward to this week, and it was a colossal mess. So I log on, and, since I only had the one stream and the 6 hours to do it on, people were like, hey, don't bother with 10s. You're not going to have any, it's just going to be a waste of your time. Just do lower keys. So I said, all right, forget it. We'll try 6. I figured anything below the death thing would keep people a little bit more engaged, and you'd think it would be easy. We were scaled to 639 for that testing. That was very different than when we did the 10s. I believe that's like 660 something, so that's a big part of it. But 639 for a 6 and a 5 and all that, I think that's very high. You would think that if you're fully geared this season, you should be able to go pretty close to 10s in your first week. That's usually how it would happen in the past. And I know they're making a lot of changes this season. So the 4 dungeons we tested, again, are the War Within dungeons. So we started with Darkflame Cleft. I'm going to go through all 4 of these and give my thoughts on them now, just in case that's not clear. Darkflame Cleft is the dungeon I was the most fearful of because there's a couple big issues with Darkflame Cleft. One is, I think, the boss difficulty and mechanical density on the encounters seemed very high when I did it on only heroic mode. And I also was very, very fearful of the last boss specifically. But not only just the last boss, but the entire basically second half of the dungeon with the minecart and all the stuff back there. And somehow that's the best dungeon. Well, it's the one that I'm the most pleased with. Let's put it that way. There's still some things I definitely think are going to be a huge problem. Out of the gate in the trash of the dungeon, there's this mob that knocks enemies back as well as players when it does an ability. And that mob cannot be moved it's a regular melee mob, so there's lots of enemies near it. It's going to be hard to not constantly and it knocks them far. Like, it knocks them all over the place. So we're talking about how to deal with that. Maybe just have, your back against a wall with the enemies against a wall too. It's just really not fun. Like, it's just really stupid to see mobs get knocked. Like, think about Thunderstorm, and it's more yards than Thunderstorm. I don't think there's anything in the game that knocks enemies back as far as this mob does. But it's like whatever. It's just fodder trash. And oh, one other thing with the testing in the day we did it was you can only do well, because it was a 5 or 6. We only had tyrannical, so this is a big issue. I definitely am not satisfied with that, and that's why I enjoy doing the 10s, because you can test the trash difficulty versus the boss difficulty. But in terms of the actual numerical difficulty of any of the dungeons, it's gonna be hard for me to say anything about that because we did it on such a low key. But they were still hard. Like, they were not easy, but as a tank, it was basically like fall asleep and just wait for people to figure out the mechanics. And we had some problems with that. But anyway, Darkflame Cleft, yes, substantially better. They did some major changes to the minecart area. To the whole dungeon, I think, had a lot of changes. I'm not very familiar with these dungeons prior. Like, I did them on, I guess, Heroic in like probably the first week of the expansion, and then I never touched them again. And this was the first time I did them. So I'm definitely going to have to get back on there and do them more. Like, I'm substantially more well-versed in Operation Floodgate now, which is crazy considering I've only done that 10 times. But that's more times than I did any of these other dungeons. But the actual difficulty of the minecart area was basically non-existent. Again, not fortified. I don't know that those enemies there would make it harder. But yeah, my big concern with that area was that it was going to be very difficult for the tank to do. Like, I figured the enemies that were guarding the candles would need to be tanked, meaning that you as the tank would constantly be running into the darkness and, trying to get the enemies and then kind of, turning your back to them and sprinting back to the car ASAP. I didn't know how it was going to get handled, and that's very annoying, and I think that's not fun as a Blood Death Knight especially, but that's not the case. It seems like the enemies are easily tanked. They don't seem to do much in that area, and I was able to just kind of pull them in and let the DPS go and get what they needed. There was funny moments where people like run into the hole. There's like big holes. It's like a mine shaft thing, and you can just fall into that. So be aware there's going to be some funny clips of that dungeon, that's for sure. But the last boss was as hard as I expected it to be. It's a total mess, and I've been told that if you wipe to it, you have to do the entire like. You guys ever play Super Mario RPG with the minecart? There's a minecart thing, and like probably about halfway through the game, that's what it feels like. It's just like a total like RP event almost. Like, it's just, I don't like it. It's nonsense, but it does damage to the boss, and I guess you could maximize that. I don't know how that works, if it only does a set amount of damage no matter what, but yeah, it's a pain in the ass. And apparently if you wipe to that boss, you have to do that again. We did not wipe because it was a low key, but it was still a pain in the ass fight. And I think actually somebody even DC'd. But yeah, the candle needs to be moved a lot. You need to be, getting the candles in and out. And I think the fears and the problems that the fight, looks like are failures, they're inevitable. I think you're going to have these happen no matter what. But yeah, that dungeon ended up being pretty good. I think the first boss was the most strangest one. I don't know if that fight was always like that, but it's just tons and tons of ads. You had to tank them on this minecart track thing, and you have to kind of let the ads get killed. But yeah, of course, people are just going to freaking pad on these ads, and it's just, they're not going to tank them on it. Like, it's fixating them. So anyway, so that dungeon was good. Then we did Rookery, and that was the biggest surprise of the day. That dungeon was absurd. It was insanely difficult. It was kind of bookended by the fact that we had basically two different guys in two groups that were just like, lol, this is easy. Why did you die? It's like, I cannot stand that kind of stuff. Certainly in live WoW, but like in the PTR, it's like, what are you doing here, man? Like, why are you on the PTR if you had this attitude? But anyway, that was not really, like, it was just frustrating because of that. But the fights were all really, really hard. There's 3 bosses. It's a kind of a common theme, right? 3 dungeons with 3 bosses, right? Or is it, yeah, it's 3, or is there 4? Maybe 4. So anyway, it's really bad, and it's like gonna be insanity, I think, for people who don't know these fights. Like, it took us, we spent probably 2 hours in there on a 5. You know what I mean? Now, the last boss was definitely the hardest numerically, but we learned some things about the fight. I'll explain that quickly. But first, I want to just say the first 2 bosses were they're mechanically heavy. Let's put it that way. And then comparing that to Operation Floodgate, it's like, wow. Insanely mechanically heavy. The first boss is just a position fight, basically. It has no real danger from what I saw on that level, and probably that's going to scale up pretty well because it was just absolutely no danger. But the mechanic, let me tell you about the mechanic on the first boss. It is a line. I'm sure many of you guys remember it. It always goes out on these vented areas. There's like these little vents on the floor. It always goes out on that. There's 4 of them, so it's like a cross thing. And you have to kind of navigate it. It always goes right to left if you're facing the boss. So you just stand to the right of one of the vents and you move. Every time, pretty much like every second, a new swirl comes out on top of you, and it drops a little electrical field. Okay, so this fight's insanely easy. Everybody stands next to the vent. You move to the left, drop your puddle, move again, drop the puddle, move again, drop the puddle, move again, drop the puddle. Okay, very easy. 4 times. Then you end up in a vent. So as a tank, just move them past that vent and just do the same thing. That's it. Rinse and repeat. Really no danger in the fight. It's just a bunch of dodging. Guess what people aren't very good at in the game? I mean, how many times have I showed this on low keys now, right? People cannot move their characters well. People cannot accurately like stack and move, and people constantly, either greed for damage or get left behind. And one of the guys I was talking about was frustrating today. The guy's standing out at range. Like, there's no reason to be at range. The puddles are dropping a denial zone that's causing the fight to be harder. And you got people spread out. Even though the guy's literally like, lol, this is easy. Why are people dying to it, Like, this is the game that we're playing. And these 3 fights are all like this. All 3 fights are like this. So whether or not it's hard numerically, it's going to be a pug mess. Absolute mess. And, yeah, they all get worse, one after the next. But, yeah, just be aware. You're going to see a lot of deaths to that first boss in low keys. Because that instantly comes out. The thing that I was talking about, don't stand on the vent. If you're on the vent, you die. Like it was a 5, 1 shot. That's it. You cannot live that, at least on that difficulty. I don't know what's going to happen in the real game, but yeah, it was insane. And there's no telegraph for it at all. We literally had to teach every time we did the dungeon. I had to teach it. People were typing it out. There was no way to know it was going to happen. You just had to know. You basically just got lucky if you didn't know. That was it. That was the only way you're going to survive. The trash in there, by the way, tons and tons of casters as well in that dungeon. Oh yeah, and really the trash too. Then the second part of the dungeon, the trash constantly drops another void zone, and then a smaller void zone. You're kind of like moving from one zone to the next, basically. Second boss, similar. Another thing that you have to dodge, and it's going to eat up the room. You're basically doing a very similar fight to the first one, only it's a lot easier to dodge. There's lines that come out. It's like the Twilight Devastation beam comes out of the mechanic, and we had this one guy. He must have died to it every single time. We did like 5 pulls. He died 5 times to it. That's the PTR, I guess. But yeah, anyway, it was very, very strategically difficult, those 2 bosses. And then the third boss is just insanity. It's extremely tuned numerically, and even for a 5, it seemed overtuned. But there was a bit of a bug, I think. Basically, the way it works is the boss has a shield for 20% of its HP. When you break that shield, the boss then gets stunned by like the RP, like the guy who's in there from the follower dungeon. And when he stuns him, he takes 100% more damage. So, if you don't do good damage in those windows, this is going to be like a 12-minute fight or something. Not like you'll never beat the boss if you don't do good damage in those windows. You can't solo the boss. Like, another one of these fights where it's going to be really, really hard to solo. And the big problem is the fight is featuring these little pillars. And if you don't break the pillars with the circle, then ads spawn and the ads like instantly wipe you. We had 1 up and it was still dangerous. There's supposed to be 4. So you got to make sure you do that every time. But the pillars are like super stretched. Like we're talking about probably like 200 yards away from each other from end to end. I don't know how the hell anybody's going to heal that fight. That sounds insane. And it was impossible for us because it was, I think, bugged. Well, I don't know. I don't know if you could call it a bug, to be honest. It just could be insanely bad design. But basically, the pillars would come out and then we'd break the shield. And then the boss would get stunned because no shield. And then the pillars would explode and the ads would come out. So there would be no circles. Like ads come out from the pillars. Pillars need to be broken by circles. Pillars spawn, then circles. And it happened 3 times where we pushed the boss and it wasn't like we weren't doing anything crazy. You know what I mean? It's a 5. So I think it's bugged, maybe, or I don't know. Maybe the circles are still supposed to spawn in the stun phase. Maybe the pillars shouldn't break in the stun phase. I don't know which. But it's like no way that can go live like that because like you're now talking. We actually had to like be like, listen, don't do any damage on the pull because this happened on the pull. Like 20 seconds into the fight, you'd wipe because of this. So I think it's bugged. But yeah, pretty much couldn't do it. So we didn't get to kill that boss at all. But we saw the whole fight. Then we did Priory. Okay, and this one that had some heavy changes, especially to the trash. We learned a few things that the mini bosses, so there's like a mini boss that spawns a mini boss and they're part of the encounter. So like theoretically you can fight the boss with all 3 mini bosses up. I guess they all change his mechanics to some degree. is similar to Core Stars, extremely similar actually, but ironically different in one very specific way. You can't get rid of all the mini bosses, so you have to choose one to live. And I think depending on the first set of mini bosses, they're like, it's like, I think like captain, then lieutenant or something like that. So you kill the captain or something, and then the lieutenant spawns, and then you go kill the boss or something like that, And so you choose 2 out of the 3, and they're each, like, the one that lives has a mechanic. So what we ended up doing was we killed the guy in the front, which is the guy who does the knockback, and then we killed the guy on the right, which is the guy who does the fire, and then that leaves another fire mini boss with the boss itself. And that one was just dodge. Like, there was no unavoidable damage. And I think that's going to be the play, because the other ones seem to have a lot more damage and a lot more problems. Like the one that, the alternative is one that just does this AoE holy damage constantly. So anyway, the dungeon itself, the first boss was absurdly easy. Like we said, compared to any other dungeon in the game, any other boss in the game, this boss is not a boss. Like, it's basically a mini boss with a lot of health. And in fact, that would be a good way to describe it, because it's boring. Like, you're just sitting there moving from fire and attack, like punching the, it's like, all right, is it dead yet? No. Okay. We'll be back here. You know what I mean? Like, it's just super boring, no strategy to it, no difficulty to it. And it's really weird because it's a boss, and every other boss in the game at that point had been really difficult. And then we do the second boss, and it's ridiculous, like unbelievably ridiculous. There's these hammers, like, he spawns hammers on a player, and then it radiates out like Blessed Hammers do for Prop Pally, and they're gigantic, and they're so fast. So basically what you need to do, everybody needs to stand on kind of one side of the room, and then they just vacate, because you're not really going to be able to accurately dodge these things. It's definitely possible, but yeah, no way that's going to happen reliably. So you're going to just have to just vacate, go from one side to the other. Complicated by the fact that there's multiple area denial mechanics in the fight on top of that. And there's like a circle that's like a yellow circle you have to soak. And when you soak it, it puts a dot on you and does a big burst of AoE damage. Now, this is very similar. We were talking about this on stream, but we believe it's similar to the star in Soli's Gambit in Tazavesh. But that mechanic was an AoE dot instead, and that's stacked. So you couldn't have it break too quickly. But this is the opposite. This is a single target dot and just AoE upfront damage. And so what I did was I just popped AMS. I ran into it. It doesn't give me the dot. So it can soak all 3 charges back to back to back. Now, that's probably dangerous for the group. And like I said, in a 5, it did not come into play. But I would imagine in a higher key, it would. Now, another interesting thing is it knocks you back. So I was actually able to, like, you would get knocked back. Just like in Soli's Gambit, you would run into it, it'd knock you back to try to prevent you from accidentally triggering it too many times. But as a Death Knight, we had Death's Advance. So I was actually able to just run, stand in it, and it just goes away. Like, bang, bang, bang. Like, that's it. It's gone. Pow, right? So, yeah. I don't know how that's going to play out strategy-wise, but the fight is, like, intense. It's intense. That's the only way to describe it. It's not very hard. It's just intense. Like, you're constantly moving, constantly dipping and ducking these things, moving from one side of the room to the other. And then he's got, like, a wings type mechanic. Like, he's a paladin. So he pops wings. And then when the wings are up, one of his mechanics is stronger, basically. So you have to deal, like, we had to soak the circle thing that I just described 5 times instead of 3 times when he has wings up. And then the last boss. The last boss is, like, I don't know. It's really not that hard. It doesn't sound like it's that complicated on paper. We must have wiped, we probably did that boss probably 10 or 12 times maybe. And we probably had about 7 of those wipes to a blind. It's really funny. We kind of got into a little bit of an argument about it on stream about what type of players are on the PTR. But let me just pose this to you guys, right? It's a spell. It's called Blinding Light. Paladins literally have the same name of a spell. And if your character views it, this is how I described it to somebody in the group because we kept wiping to it. I said, listen, it's a very, very, very bright light. If you look at it, your eyes hurt so bad, you're going to die from it. That's how bad your eyes are going to hurt. And if you don't die from it, you're going to be so overwhelmed by the pain, you're not going to be able to do anything for a while. You're going to just kind of wander in a random, you get blinded, right? That's the fight. I mean, it's so freaking obvious, right? Like, you just turn your character, that's it. We must probably have 20 deaths. 20 individual deaths to this. Now, it is complicated a little bit by some of the other mechanics, but at the most, you kind of just pay attention to the cast, get a plater script to make a little sound for it when it casts. Maybe you could even make a sound when it ends. I don't know, but yeah, it's very, very simple mechanic. And to fail it multiple times, it's like, whoa. It's really crazy. But that's not the hard part. The hard part is the phase transition. She goes up a stage, there's stairs, you go up the stairs, there's a shield. You have to punch, maybe kick, maybe strike the shield. And the longer it's up, the more ads spawn, okay? So when we did it, the ads seemed to get a debuff. I couldn't really get a clear answer on this, but I think we got the understanding of what's going on. They have a debuff on them. Makes them do insane damage, but it makes them kind of bleed out, take damage over time. So killing the ads isn't actually required, it doesn't seem. But if they punch you once, you are toast. I think those ads on that boss fight did more damage than the actual trash in the dungeon. If a DPS tanked a trash mob in the dungeon, they would probably live longer than if they tanked the ads in this fight, okay? So we realized that quickly, and it was a variety of obvious solutions to it, but things like Ring of Peace, we got Ursul's Vortex knockback, we got Roots, we got knockbacks, we got anything that you can do, slows to get them to take longer to get up the stairs, but we could not kill that boss because it was simply not possible for us to not get a second set of ads. That's ultimately why the fight was impossible. And at first I was like, oh, this has got to be bugged, right? But then we found out that the buff that they get is actually part of the game. It says it does what it's supposed to do. So I don't know if we're missing something on what that is, but I'm 100% sure that if we only had one set of ads, it would be super easy mode because we'd be able to just root and slow the first set. They wouldn't really reach the top of the platform. The shield dies and we carry on with the fight, doing the same mechanics again. But if that second set of ads come and then everybody exhausted all their bleeds and or all their roots and all their knockbacks and slows, then you're just done. There's now 20 ads attacking people. It's not possible. So we talked about this on stream. This is a great fight for utility such as Gorfien's Grasp, such as Slow Death and Decay if you're a Death Knight. Jix recommended that I stand down there and just drop Death and Decay, Slow Death and Decay. I didn't have the talent, but in theory, it would slow all the mobs to such a degree. They do split up side to side, so they're not really going to be able to stay in it for very long. But what I think might have been a better play, actually, would be to Gorfien's them and then blind them. Use Blinding Sheet on them, and then they would just kind of sit there and probably just die. Then you're good. You do that once, you're done. But everybody else is up there, and I'm just letting you know that not all the mobs fixate. I don't know if I said that, but the mobs fixate, and that's why it's dangerous. You can't actually get threat on most of them. Can't figure that part out either. But it does seem like, you're supposed to have threat. But they don't. They just run away from you. So, yeah. Anyway, that dungeon's bosses were insanely difficult. And, one was insanely easy, and then one was insanely difficult, and the other one was just a mess. It was just a lot of mechanics. And then we finally did the brewery, the Cinder Brew Meadery, right? Is that the name of it? It's something meadery. And it's pretty much exactly as I expected. Insanely fun, super high volume, every pull, tons and tons of AoE. People are going to love this dungeon. Bosses were very, very easy. It's very night and day easy boss-wise compared to the other bosses that we talked about. And the trash was really the hard part, honestly. I think that dungeon is going to be way harder trash-wise than boss-wise. Kind of didn't really understand the boss encounters. There's a bee. You got to fly a pilot a bee into a barrel on the one fight. I didn't really get to do a lot. And I'm going to tell you the big takeaway from this, there's really not a lot of tank mechanics. It's really strange. The fights that we talked about being the hardest fights, they don't do a thing for the tank. Nothing. That blind boss, literally no mechanics for the tank. From what I could tell, 0 mechanics for the tank. And the last boss in Rookery, it has 1 mechanic for the tank, and it's just a giant line. So just don't point it at the group, and that's it. There's no danger to it. I don't even think it does any damage at all on that level. So I don't know. Very strange. People keep talking about the difficulty of tanking or the shortage of tanks. I really think all of this is just, I think this is some weird misnomer here. But regardless, even if you want to believe it's true, that's fine. If you believed this season was hard, then I'm going to go ahead and say this new season's probably going to be much easier. Now we still got 3 dungeons left to learn and see how they play out. But yeah, in terms of bosses, like right now in season 1, it's pretty boss heavy. Like the difficulty is quite boss heavy. Strangely, like very rarely has that been the case in the past. Usually the trash is the hard part. I wouldn't. There's some pulls like in Dawnbreaker and Grim Atoll that are really, really hard to tank. But I would say like a good portion of the difficulty of the tank role right now is on bosses. Like you got Throngus, really all the bosses in Grim Atoll are hard to tank. Dawnbreaker, the first boss, really hard to tank. There's a lot of tank breakers on bosses. And I think Blizzard has maybe wanted to relax that and kind of, I don't know. It's just very easy to tank all the stuff that I tank so far. But again, it's kind of a hard thing to say because there's like low keys. We only did low keys. We didn't even finish them. That's how hard they were. But it was no point. I was like, oh, I can't survive this. Like at no point did we run into that. So I don't know what to say, but I will say that they seemed a lot harder. People talked about maybe some aura scaling change that kind of happened behind the scenes. So maybe if we went back into the Operation Floodgate thing, it'd be different, but I don't think so, to be honest. So next week we will be back with Motherlode. Can't wait to do that one again. And then Workshop and Theater of Pain. Those had substantial changes. A lot of people were freaking out about those dungeons, seeing the changes they saw. So we will take a look at them and make another video next weekend. So thanks for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed. If you guys did PTR testing, please leave your comments down below. Otherwise, another common question just quickly was, how is Blood DK faring? There's 0 tank changes for Blood Death Knight. From what I could tell, not a single change. And like I said, very easy to tank the content I've tested. So I think Blood's always going to be in a good state in any Mythic Plus content. There's a lot of casters. And a lot of archers, like in especially Priory. So Gorfiends may be really powerful all of a sudden. But definitely regular grip, very powerful. So let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. We'll see you guys in the next one.